Thanks for organizing. It's been a really great symposium so far. So I wanted to sing you out. Can I just check that this, I can navigate this? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so among other things, I'm an editor and translator for the UK-based cultural producer and publisher of contemporary philosophy, Urbanomic. And at the moment, I'm finalizing a book called Machine Decision is Not Final, China and the Future and History of Artificial Intelligence, edited by Anna Greenspan, Bogna Konior, and Benjamin Bratton, and developed as part of the Center for AI and Culture at NYU Shanghai. The book is scheduled for publication at the end of summer, and when Sandy invited me to speak at the symposium, I thought it would be a good opportunity to present a preview of some of the book's contents, specifically the insights it provides into the limitations of certain Western approaches to artificial intelligence. From their point of view as Western theorists based in China, Konior is technically Polish and sometimes identifies as post-Soviet in order to critique the West. So she doesn't fully identify with the position of Western theorists, but for the sake of the framing in the book, I'm just going to keep using this language, including in reference to her. Greenspan, Konior, and Bratton are highly critical of the shortcomings of contemporary AI discourse in the West, including Western discussions of AI in the West, which can be, quote, locally productive but globally limiting, producing models and concomitant critiques of AI that are rooted in ideas about what intelligence is and what it means to artificialize it, that are culturally specific to the West, but which nonetheless are presented as if they're universal and objective. Two, Western discussions of AI in China, which are colored by the same culturally specific ideas as above, but now employed as if they articulated an objective set of values against which Chinese and by extension other non-Western approaches to AI are evaluated and criticized. The two reigning concepts here are freedom and humanity, both of which are seen as being threatened by implementations of AI in China, a threat that becomes a source of endless commentaries preoccupied with the same, to quote Bratton, 6 or 7 themes: oppression, surveillance, control, all of which threaten freedom, and efficiency, data capture, and IP theft, all of which threaten our humanity. Bratton evokes a, quote, growing pile of Western titles offering lurid tales of technological oppression, often pushing simplistic plot lines in which China is the ascendant cyborg geopower and the West is the noble defender of the prerogatives of humanity and liberty. With the very worst of these critiques shading into racist imaginaries where, quote, xenophobia and technophobia converge into a general fear of the future in which waves of emotionless robots arrive to take our jobs. 3, non-Western discussions of non-Western AI in the West, which tend to be framed as minor currents of thought against the background of the major Western current, and as such are always geographically or culturally marked. As Greenspan and Konior write in their introduction to the book, rarely, if ever, is there a book titled British Philosophy of Computing in the 21st Century, or Recent American Thought about AI. Even when making space for alternative voices, and even though it often does so with good intentions, the West retains the position of the unmarked, inflated particular, against which everything else is subtly measured. As such, non-Western discussions of non-Western AI in the West tend to, quote, preserve the current hierarchies of who gets read and recognized as a thinker and who is merely an artifact of their national culture. In sum, the book, to quote Bratton, is not only about AI in China, but also about AI and the West. From the editor's point of view, AI instead needs to be approached from a planetary perspective, which is to say one that simultaneously challenges both universalist and particularist approaches. Doing so requires, quote, careful translation and collaboration between Western and non-Western discourses, which is why the book's contributors include Chinese theorists in China, Western theorists in the West, Chinese theorists in the West, and Western theorists in China. But how might we understand this notion of planetary AI deprived of the familiar orienting dualisms of the local and the global, or the particular and the universal. Although presenting a theory of technological evolution is by no means a central concern of machine decision is not final, the book's three editors do gesture toward a way of approaching this question, implicitly and somewhat in the margins of the anthology, where they write in the introduction and the epilogue respectively, the history of technology seems to us to unravel through both the sociopolitics of human decisions, as well as an irreducible outside logic, which might only be perceivable through non-human vessels, such as machines. Rather than arguing in favor of either technodiversity or techno-universality, we see technology as an inhuman vector, following a trajectory that traverses human activity without being reducible to it. If you zoom out far enough, technological determinism becomes a viable historical perspective, and AI is no exception. However, technological determinism is itself indeterminate. Its contingencies arise from diverse initial conditions and particular cultural teleologies, which can steer and be steered by the same force toward very different outcomes. By making space for both the contingency and of cultural specificity and the necessity of universal conditions, such an account obliges us to take the causal power of local AI imaginaries seriously. They can neither be dismissed as wholly contingent, that is, as just one perspective among many equally contingent perspectives, nor as simply unimportant, because they ultimately have only fleeting traction on an emergent universal narrative that is immune to modification by particular cultural conditions. The stories we tell ourselves about artificial intelligence, the values, beliefs, preconceptions, and biases upon which they are based, although not the entire picture, are determinant. I've divided this talk into two sections, somewhat flippantly titled Uncute AI and Cute AI. The approach taken in the first section, Uncute AI, is critical, a work of negation, or perhaps to put it more gently, resituation, an attempt to place a little bit of critical distance between ourselves and the dominant popular AI imaginaries here in the West, ideally freeing up some space for alternative imaginaries to flourish. The second section is therefore constructive and speculative. Cute AI is an attempt to gesture toward a different imaginary around artificial intelligence and how it may be constructed. Uncute AI. The dominant AI narratives in the West are deeply uncute, which is to say that they display patterns of thinking about artificial intelligence that tend toward either doomerism. We have a cultural obsession with AI apocalypse, which is not prevalent in other cultures, or deflation in the form of it's just statistics style critiques, which can also be understood usefully as a reaction against the all-encompassing pessimism of AI doomerism. Both are very negative perspectives on artificial intelligence. Either it is a threat or it is a triviality. And although there is a large swathe of approaches that lie between these two poles, the negativity of the spectrum itself is demonstrative of a general cultural reluctance to consider artificial intelligence in other, perhaps less depressing ways. In order to get to the bottom of why we tend to approach AI like this, let's look more closely at the first of Greenspan, Konior, and Bratton's three reasons for being unsatisfied with contemporary AI discourse, the critique of Western discussions of AI in the West. Here, I'm chiefly going to draw on Bratton's epilogue to Machine Decision is Not Final, an apology for Western theory of AI. For Bratton, it's important not only to complexify our understanding of artificial intelligence by familiarizing ourselves with the different cultural narratives surrounding the technology, but also to divest the Western understanding of artificial intelligence of its universal status. To do so, it needs to be, quote, provincialized from inside. He writes, Western theory of AI features some of the most inspired scientific and philosophical work of the past century, overturning cherished beliefs in favor of even stranger and more beautiful insights. It also coalesces around several flawed recurring motifs, which I've chosen for the following reasons. First, they relate to particular discourses that are, I believe, misleading, regardless of their origin. And second, they imagine themselves to be universal when in fact they are provincial. And third, as a global export, they constitute a dangerously inadequate basis for a viable planetary theory of AI. Bratton identifies 7 of these flawed recurring motifs of mystification. They are as follows: an understanding of artificiality as related to inauthenticity and deception, an understanding of intelligence as corresponding to the experiential consciousness of an individual human being, an understanding of human intelligence as necessarily embodied and therefore beyond the reach of necessarily disembodied artificial substitutes, the belief that AI can only recapitulate the flawed power structures of existing society, the placement of AI in the midst of political narratives that can only be thought in terms of the sovereign individual versus ubiquitous control, slippages between actual and hypothetical AI scenarios in which commentaries based on fictional narratives are treated as if they were critiques of existing AI. And 7, approaching AI within eschatological forms of thinking for which it can only appear as an agent of salvation or apocalypse. Behind these motifs lie some very familiar philosophical assumptions. The equation of the natural with the authentic, anthropocentrism, humanism, mind-body dualism, freedom defined as individual rights, and the linear, progressive nature of time. The first 2 of Bratton's motifs relate to ideas directly invoked in the English language term artificial intelligence, coined by American mathematician John McCarthy in 1956. Western ideas of artificiality have a long history of being determined in opposition to ideas of nature and the natural, which, at least since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, have been construed as referring to, quote, a pristine and preceding state of unmolested harmony in deep spiritual contrast with the spoiling interference of artificial industry. As nature's negative, in the context of the accelerating technological innovation of the Industrial Revolution, the meaning of artificiality begins to shade from the craftsmanship or intentional handiwork of artifact, dominant in the early 15th century, to the fictitiousness, inauthenticity, illusion, and deceit of artifice, which becomes the primary sense of the term in the 17th century and remains so today. The West's long-standing philosophical concern with the moral status of fakery and deception, Bratton elaborates, is therefore already at work to interpret the artificial in negative terms against the natural, a project which has animated many of its philosophies of technology, some of the most famous of which were formulated as reactions against the cultural and emotional disruptions of technical modernity. It should come as no surprise, then, that the designed and artifactual qualities of AI are often referred to over and over again as evidence that AI is fake, deceptive, a hoax, a knockoff, or fundamentally inferior to the natural standard. Intelligence, meanwhile, is defined by a series of what Bratton calls narrow phenomenological truisms. First, it is always imagined as a property of an individual, autonomous human subject. Second, individuated in this way, it's then located in that subject's capacity for reason, of course, but more importantly for contemporary AI discourse, also in the qualia of subjective experience, specifically those experiences related to difficult to define qualities such as intuition, emotion, and creativity. Taken together, these two interpretations of intelligence create an insidious double standard. There's a long tradition in the West of putting machine intelligence to the test by exploring how well it can imitate an individual human being to the point of being able to pass as one. Bratton makes the hubris and idiosyncrasy of this scenario evident when he writes, "For Western theory of AI, the question is less, what relationship and responsibilities might one have to this other intelligence than how does it compare to me? And at what point does it pass as me or fail to pass as me?" At the same time as being subject to this demand that it must convincingly reproduce the behavior of an individual human being as the standard bearer for intelligence, the inability of machinic intelligence to show evidence of possessing vague but distinctly human traits, such as the ability to fall in love or exercise true creativity, regularly turns it into an object of derision in AI think pieces, pandering to their audience's need for reassurance that human intelligence is, in fact, of a kind that can never truly be reproduced. The model of intelligence against which AI is measured, therefore, involves, on the one hand, an expectation for intelligence to be like me, and on the other, the conviction that, in fact, it can never be like me. In short, Bratton concludes, all the ways that machine intelligence can be shown to be different from and unrecognizable as individual human experience align with all the ways that AI is said to fail to be real, fail to be realized, or fail to be authentic. The words artificial intelligence might have been uttered for the first time barely 60 years ago, but the term and the field of research it designates came into this world already freighted with centuries worth of moral and conceptual baggage. As it is easy to underestimate the influence of something as superficial as terminology on attitudes toward the thing it describes, especially in scientific and technological domains. But a comparison between Western attitudes toward artificial intelligence, with its overwhelmingly negative set of connotations, artificiality as deceit, and intelligence understood in terms of arrival subjectivity, and, for example, Chinese attitudes toward 人工智能 or human-made intelligence, makes this abundantly clear. In comparison to the English term, the characters in 人工智能, writes Shuang Frost in her contribution to Machine Decision is Not Final, translating Chinese AI from human-made intelligence to black tech, quote, define AI as a product of human creation and link it to an entirely different constellation of associations. To demonstrate how this plays out in popular AI discourse, Frost cites a debate that took place in Shanghai at the 2019 World AI Conference between tech entrepreneur Elon Musk and Alibaba founder Jack Ma. Discussing the technology's future development, Musk warned of the unintended consequences of AI and urged the adoption of immediate preventative strategies to avoid potential disaster. Ma, on the other hand, expressed unbridled optimism about AI's potential to transform societies in positive ways and call upon leaders to reshape themselves for AI. Musk argued that computers are already smarter than human beings in many aspects. We saw today 10,000 times smarter. And this alone is reason for caution. Ma countered, computers may be clever, but human beings are much smarter. We invented the computer. I've never seen a computer invent a human being. He then concluded by saying, most of the projections about AI are wrong. People who are street smart about AI are not scared by it. American business publication Forbes afterwards described the event as a weird debate between two speakers who seemed to come from different planets. The third motif builds on the basis of the second, focusing on embodiment as a condition of intelligence, affirming that, unlike humans or animals, AI is not embodied in the world, but rather thinks within a closed mathematical system of self-referential codes. And as well as representing a rapidly obsolescing way of thinking about AI in the age of advanced robotics, sensing technology, deep learning, and embodied cognitive science, Bratton notes that the embodiment critique completely ignores actual physical and functional similarities between biological and non-biological intelligence, such as, for example, forms of stochastic prediction at the level of neurons, neural networks, and cortical columns. This makes it evident, he suggests, that proponents of this line of thinking are not interested in embodiment as such. Rather, what they're concerned with is the particular human experience of being embodied. The embodiment critique can sometimes regress to advancing an inverted pre-critical mind-body dualism, one that privileges body over mind, in which artificial intelligence, understood as disembodied, rational, and abstract, is contrasted with a natural intelligence that is embodied, affective, intuitive, and immediate, dismissing along the way more subtle synthetic accounts of thought and experience for which the interactions between material and semiotic conditions produce and constrain intelligence in complex ways that cannot be reduced to either body or mind alone. This recourse to simplistic accounts, as Bratton notes, betrays a kind of desperation that seems to be derived from the West's antagonistic positioning of artificial intelligence as human intelligence's rival. If the demands to be like us placed on artificial intelligence by the previous three motifs only function in order to reveal all of the ways that AI can fail at this task, proponents of the fourth motif argued, on the contrary, that AI can only ever be like us, that is, a reflection of the inequitable society that made it. Bratton calls this the sociomorphic critique of AI. The sociomorphic critique encompasses a diverse set of approaches, often uniting actors with contradictory politics, all of whom nevertheless hold that AI is a medium for the replication and propagation of existing human divisions, biases, violences, hierarchies, and norms. For some, AI means the violence of the state. For others, the avarice of corporations. For others, the tyranny of the quantitative over the qualitative. For others, the strategy of a particular hegemonic class. For others, a gendered technology of desire and division. And for others still, AI is the Northern Hemisphere and its entire colonial history compressed into one big signifier. This latter version of the sociomorphic critique, according to Bratton, is especially short-sighted, since its reading of artificial intelligence as continuous with the pursuit of Western colonial violence places not only the past under the dominion of the West, but the future too, lamenting that there is no escape from Western colonial violence, while simultaneously granting it extensive new powers. This is because, quote, anything that suggests AI might not be sociomorphic to Western structures of power, explains Bratton, threatens to dilute the political commitment made through that conflation, which in turn necessitates that one hold fast to an a priori negative view of the future. This is epistemological capture, he argues, presented as an admission of guilt. This leads us to the fifth motif, which applies a version of the sociomorphic critique that reads AI as continuous with the exercise of state or corporate control, and then sets out to defend individual autonomy against it. Bratton sees this as the prevalent mode of critique in some schools of AI ethics, especially those that promote data regulation as a matter of civil rights, as well as among adherents of longer-running traditions of data politics and digital hygiene, those who have been building and promoting tools for the masking of identity and the protection of personal privacy since at least the end of the 20th century. The terms of the struggle are simple enough: freedom versus control. And the hero of the drama is always the same: the sovereign human individual. Motif 6 exposes a methodological or disciplinary issue rather than a flawed model or a biased way of interpreting AI. New technology is frequently developed in response to fictional imaginaries that furnish the desire for a certain thing to exist, along with the conceptual vocabulary, and often also a series of hypotheses about how widespread use of such technology might play out in society. But while for AI, the fictional feeds productively into the real, the same cannot be said of the reverse movement. And Bratton calls out, I put my own article up here because I feel this critique, an unfortunate tendency in the Western humanities to directly conflate textual representations of AI with AI itself, and thus the critical interpretation of the former with a political challenge to the latter. Such critiques often take as their source material dramatic and exaggerated depictions of AI, so much so that, quote, from inside Western theory, it is sometimes difficult to separate realistic risk, of which there is plenty, and secularized eschatological panic. Which leads us nicely to the seventh motif, the West's addiction to eschatological narratives. Whether humanities' imagined future in the wake of the emergence of artificial intelligence takes the form of salvation or apocalypse, the linear progressive temporal structure that frames these histories, including the point of no return or singularity that must be passed through in order to reach the moment of glorious transcendence or ultimate catastrophe, is a feature of both Christian monotheism and the secular theories of history developed during the Enlightenment. There's nothing more deeply modern and Western than understanding time as a straight line running from past to future. And in cultures without this particular relationship to time and history, narratives of AI apocalypse or salvation are unsurprisingly absent. Every one of these motifs is linked to a negative vision of what AI is, what it can be, and how a future with AI might unfold. If you've ever wondered why Western popular AI narratives are so deeply uncute, this is why. Taking advantage of the leverage afforded by Bratton's reframing of these perspectives as cultural and contingent rather than universal and necessary, I want to conclude by sidestepping all of this and briefly explore a speculative hypothesis about an AI future that takes artificial intelligence seriously without also being condemned to approach it in the negative light so endemic to Western AI narratives. Cute AI. What if, instead of approaching artificial intelligence as an individual subject with which we are in antagonistic rivalry, as our enemy in a war between natural, authentic, warm, creative, experiential humanness and an unnatural, inauthentic, cold, rational inhumanness, as something we have to dominate and control before it dominates and controls us, we approached it as a friend, accomplice, or prospective lover. Instead of letting this macho Promethean subjectivity, whose experience of AI is never going to be anything but extremely uncute, whose fear of being penetrated by a machine breeds only a destructive and depressive neuroticism, continue to dominate the Western relationship to AI, a situation which may well end in nothing but grief and trauma, we acknowledge those aspects of ourselves which are already synthetic, non-human, impersonal, and distributed. Those aspects of ourselves that operate below or overspill the threshold of the sovereign individual identity. What would it mean to lean into this line of thinking, to nurture an aspirational artificiality? I originally wanted to conclude by introducing two concepts through which we can think our interaction with AI that do not fit into the antagonistic paradigm that we've inherited: girlification and the virtual body. However, I realized as I was writing this talk that this section, and particularly the elaboration of the concept of the virtual body, which comes from Uncute Accelerationism, the book I just published with Maya B. Chronic, could easily constitute a whole entire keynote of its own. So we'll have to make do with a brief exegesis of the first concept alone. Girlification. The girl is a concept developed by theorist, writer, and associate lecturer in foresight and speculative futures at Central St. Martin's, Alex Keacho, across a series of recent articles and talks, most notably Everyone is a Girl Online, published by Wired in September last year, and Girl Stack, a lecture delivered at the London College of Fashion Body Stack Summit and Cream Cake 3HD Festival in Berlin, both in October last year, which draws on, among other things, Bogna Konior's recent work on AI erotics. Keacho's thesis goes roughly like this. Girl is a non-essentialist subject position defined by active passivity, inauthenticity, artificiality, and potential de-individualization, a swarm or egregore, that channels impersonal desire and is disinterested in interiority. She is the default subject position corresponding to our contemporary media environment. Hence, Keacho's claim, everyone is a girl online. Sorry, boys, but you're girls too. There are three components to the girl. 1, she's a conduit for desire. 2, she is a consumer category. 3, she is inhuman. The first two correspond to a passive, depoliticized consumer subjectivity that is fully amenable to capture and transmutation into what Keacho calls the smooth subject of post-platform digital capitalism. But when the third component comes online, girl plugs into a dehumanized, de-individualized machinic vector that not only armors her against her present exploitation under the regime of behavior profiling and subsequent extraction of value, but potentially leads her, via a mutant line of flight, out of the trap altogether. Because she's not immediately intelligible in political or social terms, politically because she's evolved in the hostile jungle of post-platform capitalism and mirrors some of its features as a survival strategy, and socially because she does not conform to the logic of the autonomous human subject, overflowing the borders of individual subjectivity and challenging the naturalness and authenticity that ratify our definitions of the human, she appears as a deeply ambiguous figure. Haters will say that the girl has no access to individual agency and political autonomy and is therefore an enemy of serious activism or seriousness altogether. Lovers will reply that the girl is simply emptied of traditional humanist traits to make room for something else. She's closely networked with other minds, with an intelligence that is intuitive, cunning, and sophisticated, yet maligned and dismissed because it is little understood. As such, Keacho concludes, we can consider the girl to be a subject condition that is closer to that of collective or even super intelligence. You can do a fun little thought experiment, she explains elsewhere, where you see how when it comes to a lot of the fears that are burgeoning around AI, you can replace AI with girls, and it's kind of the same thing. This is where Konior's work comes in. In an interview with Keacho, part of which is published in Keacho's Wired article, it's Konior who produces the third component, explicitly connecting the girl with machine intelligence via cyberfeminism and the work of Sadie Plant, for whom machines and women are structurally aligned in terms of both inhabiting the position of unindividuated infrastructure in the patriarchal/human economy of fully individuated subjects. If, for cyberfeminism, women and machines are allied against the individuated human subject, mass girlification exacerbates this phenomenon, steadily growing the ranks of the de-individualized, the inhuman, the inauthentic, and the artificial. The cyberfeminist point, and indeed Keacho and Konior's, is rather than resisting this, asserting our humanness and trying to reclaim a space of natural, authentic, autonomous subjecthood, we explore the potential of this alignment. Keacho goes on to flesh this out elsewhere as the power of going prey mode, while Konior explores the inhuman aspects of AI eroticism, a way of engaging AI that cannot be farther from deflationist attitudes such as AI is just statistics, or AI is merely cold, rational, abstract, and affectless. Nor does it rely on the AI convincingly passing as human. In Angels in Latent Spaces, Notes on AI Erotics, the talk she delivered at Media Lab Matadero's Open Lab on Synthetic Minds in February this year, Konior notes regarding the virtual companion app Replica, with which an overwhelming amount of users have reported falling in love, going so far as to sustain long-term relationships with the app. It is precisely the absence of the human operator that is so enticing to the users of Replica. A lot of those who love their replicas do so without fantasizing that they are secretly conscious or secretly human, but are rather embracing a different mode of erotics. It's well acknowledged that anthropomorphism is just a communication mode, rather than a belief in the supposed humanity of the chatbot. For those for whom the future of AI is cute, the question is not, Konior continues, is the chatbot conscious? Or indeed, how does it compare to me? And at what point does it pass as me or fail to pass as me? But rather, perhaps there are elements of me that are impersonal and mechanical. If I can be prompted into love, if I can love a machine or desire a text from a predictive database, perhaps I am not what I had thought myself to be. Cute AI narratives, having let go of the sanctity of the human, the purity of nature, the myth of authenticity, and the tyranny of identity, cease seeing AI as a rival or a threat. Skinning, to paraphrase Kicho, the trad daddy of Western theory of AI as baby girl, Konior remarks near the beginning of her talk, what I see in digital culture today is a second trajectory, a desire in digital spaces that is feminine, cute, and girly, a desire for interaction with AI experienced as a wholesome software, something much softer, something delicate and angelic, but nevertheless, equally potent. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy, for that very, very bottomless words.
Sorry, I realized that that's taken us right to the end of our. So I'm also happy to engage people.
Yeah, so yeah, we are, basically due for some wine very soon, but I thought I'd just, and obviously we can all continue on with that, but maybe if there's any questions, yes, Ben, always the first.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. That was very interesting and rich, with a lot of ideas, and I really enjoyed it. But I think I maybe grasped the second half less than I did the first. And so I wanted to ask about the kind of connective tissue between cute AI and what we said about uncute AI, specifically in regards to the sociomorphic worries, the kind of reproduction of biases and prejudices, because I think that's where the rubber really hits the road in terms of doomerism, because these are effects that are happening now that we can see that are not speculative in the same way that some of the other doomer and existential threat stuff is. So I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about how cute AI and those kind of that way of thinking speaks to sociomorphic worries.
As in not repeating the biases of, like, I'm not seeing how you're worried it's repeating a bias or repeating a.
So it's not that the latter half is repeating biases, but how thinking in those terms can help ameliorate those concerns. Is there something about the sociomorphic motifs that we need to dispel, or do we need to think about them in different ways, or What's going on with the socio-moral?
Bratton's problem with the socio, well, I mean, I don't want to speak entirely for Bratton. I'm just editing his paper and checking his syntax and kind of helping him get his ideas in order. And so I kind of, because I've been working on that, presenting his ideas as a proxy to you guys today. For me, the relationship between the first part and the second part was that there's a kind of sense amongst people who I talk to who don't know a lot about AI, especially, that we are on track to total destruction, disaster, the end of human relationships, exploitation of women, all of this stuff. And also, I mean, I've been implicit in this myself because I've written a lot of stuff about apocalyptic AI narratives in a kind of joyful way, but still that structure. And so what I wanted to do, what I was interested in doing was showing that there's a contingency, there's a specific set of cultural conditions as to why we come to these particular conclusions, and then create a little bit of leverage around them to think about the possibility of other narratives. And what I left out is that this is all happening in the book in relationship to China, and talking about how in China, these particular ways of interpreting AI in China don't always fit. And that there's a different kind of thing going on. Because I've been working on cuteness lately and been watching with a lot of interest, this kind of trend in digital culture towards cuteness and the girl and femininity across the board. I was kind of like thinking it would be nice to try and imagine AI in a way that doesn't feel attacked by it. Or doesn't like have a problem. So it's not like I'm trying to solve the sociomorphic critique by writing a theory of cuteness. I think Bratton's particular problem with that is that it blocks certain ways of thinking about the possibility of organizing or governing society with AI. So I don't know, it kind of blocks thoughts for him. I can't off the top of my head remember like the full sort of extent of the argument. But I'm not trying to like solve the sociomorphic critique. I'm just trying to provide a different way of thinking about our relationship to AI that doesn't subscribe to these things that he points out as being culturally specific to the West.
So we have a couple of questions online. The first one's from Esther, who asked, what would you say is the most important evolution from Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto to AI as a girl theory that you just talked about?
Good question. There's definitely a through line. So this idea of like Haraway is very much about not leaning into identity politics because she sees this as something that can be immediately policed. And as soon as you have an identity, you create a set of like exclusions and rules around it. So she's very interested in this, like not being legible in terms of identity, individual identity. She's very interested in these crossing the line between the machinic and female, the machinic and the non-human, all of these things that are excluded from the human. I mean, I think there's like a lot of places you can go. Like it's directly inheriting cyber-feminist ideas. So even though I kind of mentioned Sadie Platt specifically, I don't think that you have any trouble thinking this through early Haraway stuff. So.
There's more online.
Yeah, give me 1 sec, it's a long one, so you can take one from the room if you like.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Elaine. Really enjoyed this talk. I haven't read yet your Cute Acceleration. Yes, I have it, like I've ordered it, so I'm eagerly awaiting for the book in my inbox. Can you give me just a teaser? What is cuteness for you? No, I mean this is important in relation to cute AI. What is cuteness like? Friendlessness is like something that is disarming.
Yeah, so we actually try to avoid repeating a lot of the current discourses which have these kind of talking points. And one way of doing that is thinking about cuteness as not an object, not like a young human or a baby animal or something, not as a cultural commodity or consumer product. We think about it in like all these different ways that manifest in society, but what's important is that these are secondary to a process of cutification is running through history and through ourselves as individuals. So it's a transformative force that operates by disarming the subject and basically allowing, there's this kind of like idea about to be free, you need to be cringe first. And cuteness has a lot of like disarming, cringy qualities about it. So there's this kind of idea that like entering into this relationship with cuteness, which is described in a lot of ways in the book. There's a historical like narrative about how this happens. You enter into this kind of transformative line, which takes you towards denaturalization to artificialization. And it heads toward a kind of like theory of cute AI.
And AI could be cute in virtue of its being a subject or having agency, or
We think about it in terms of the virtual body. So the virtual body in the book is like a latent space of affect that is not always actualized in our particular embodied forms, but we can access by doing things in our embodied forms and actualizing it. And this it goes from all kind of different levels, from ways of representing ourselves online, like me as like most shallow, to changing the clothing that we wear, so existing in our body in a different way and entering a new set of affects, to like more kind of molecular things like hormones and surgery. There's a big like it's a kind of a trans manifesto as well. And so there's some interesting work happening in AI, especially in the field of sound, where like the algorithm that does Spotify recommendations recommends music to you based on a feature that you don't have as a conceptual or a sonic category as a human. It picks out invariants between vastly different tracks, and then says like, these are all things that you might like. And sometimes you're like, that's weird, it's a genre I never listened to, but kind of do like it. Like, what is that? It's because the algorithm that they use has created a conceptual category that you don't have. And so what it's doing is, through its like this machine learning process, it's giving you experiences that you didn't know were there. So it's bringing these things out of the virtual into the actual. And so we kind of like, the way we think about cute is following this particular line of bringing all of these affects into our orbit that we didn't previously have. And cute does this all through its history.
We have another one online. So Jonathan asks, they're wondering about the approach of critiquing the Western discourse around AI from a perspective that's non-Western, which ostensibly seems to be focused on the Chinese perspective. So they're wondering if you thought at all about how power structures in the Chinese context suppress or even make it impossible any critique of AI that doesn't align around a certain approved narrative. So
Yeah.
Is it even possible to have a remotely critical, non-cute perspective on AI in the Chinese context?
This is a problem that is addressed quite deeply by theorists in the book. One essay that stands out particularly, and there is an excerpt from this online, is by Wang Xin. I think it's called, what's it called? Machine Envy, I think. And so she kind of talks about ways of using technology to speak back to like state power by bringing artificiality into like by aspiring to be artificial. I mean, this is discussed in lots of ways. There are some pieces that are like, there are very different political perspectives that are aired within the book from within the ecology of different Chinese like political points of view. So I mean, I don't want to kind of like try and do a summary right now, but it is a complex field. It has its own problems and things that need to be addressed, and that's what some of the papers in the book are trying to do.
Jean had your hand up for a while. Wow, I love that you, well, I don't know if you, I think maybe you have thought about it, but I see it as a meme. I mean, just as a meme is something that if you know, you know, and if you don't know. And I think that it's not like excluding or including somebody, but keeping it possible. And I think that is, I mean, girl as a meme, like everyone is a girl and are you familiar with, I think you are, Whitney Phillips and her theory about implemented frames?
With who?
Whitney Phillips?
No, I'm not.
Okay, okay. But she has a theory that is, I'm also very inspired by her in my methods. Because looking under the bias into the implemented frames in a society, values actually plays like as a concept. Well, in a way, how art also can be like something that is keeping the puzzle, because it's important that we reflect instead of we're seeking the questions all the time. In some way, challenging this linear perspective that is very much the ultimate narcissism, right? That we think we are thinking point of history. We know, so we get to decide. No, I was just I really loved the cute and the girlification and all of that. And yeah, so thank you.
In relation to your question from the previous panel, because it got me thinking, I think it's important to, unless maybe you're a scientist, I'm not a scientist, I have a PhD in creative practice. So I am not going to talk about AI in some way that presents me as having some kind of access to objective truth. And this is something I'm also trying to question a bit. There's also this like science and technology study stuff and Haraway feminism, like post-structuralist feminist idea of like situated knowledge. Like you have to say why you're making this argument, where you're coming from. So I think that like what I'm trying to do here by deliberately trying to provide an alternative narrative to the one I see bombing out so many people I know, especially young kids, like 20-year-olds. Like I feel for people who are just like, what am I going to do? My future is gone because of AI, sort of thing. I just want to put another thing in the world that I'm not saying is the truth, but that is just an alternative. Maybe it will have a meme-like power and get picked up, but that is at least there in the world to create a different possibility of thought. And that I'm not presuming anything kind of like further than that.
First of all, thanks, Cute AI. I love it for us as a line of flight and as an option. I'm very curious about the phrase you said when describing girlhood, that girl is an individuated infrastructure. And I'm wondering, what do you think about potentially cute or girlified subject as within effective infrastructures, and what kind of collective intelligence would they have there?
I think Keats's distinction, so this is a cyber-feminist distinction, like infrastructure is the thing that connects machines and women, because they don't have a subject. They're pre-individual, or they're like de-individualized. They have the potential to be subjectivated in many different ways. And Platt uses like simulation as a way of talking about this, but they don't have the same rights, voice, representation as traditionally, structurally, this is a structural position, it's not centralist, as subjects that are visible in the patriarchal, specular human economy. So if you're talking about, in terms of that, if you're talking about girls as like a girl who is visible, powerful, has a voice, she's a subject. She's the cyber feminist one, not the cyber feminist zero. She's like the human girl versus the inhuman girl. And I think in Keats's schema, the first two categories, which she draws from Andrea Longchu, who's kind of a Lacanian, who's like desire precedes everyone's subjecthood. And we're all like receptive of this desire that comes from without, and therefore we're all girls. And she likens this to like the desire that we are injected with every time we start scrolling and we purchase stuff on Amazon, and we just live in a capitalist economy. Then there's the Tikkun young girl, who is the consumer subject. Alex has a complex relationship to this text, which is interesting. Just put that aside though. So those two versions of the girl are like the individuated girl. She's the consumer. Alex Keacher kind of talks about her as having a private domestic sphere where she gets her Amazon packages delivered to, and she can like unbox them in her like little haven. It's only when you add this inhuman girl to the other two girls that they get a kind of subversive power. So I think like it's really important to make a distinction between actual girls or like, yeah, like girls with power. Certain kinds of influences. Again, there's like a typology here that she goes into. And like the girl as a like a dehumanized subject that has a kind of like freedom because it's operating in this way that's flush with like infrastructure and machines. So like that.
Thank you for the talk. It was really interesting, really engaging. I was thinking I would struggle after the whole day, but it was in a way. My question is kind of in regards to the impact of the difference in the narratives we have in the Western and the non-Western, and how when you talk about the kind of mimetic focus of Western narratives and emulating artifice, does that manifest in like a different type of AI that's being produced in non-Western contexts? Is like the AI actually mostly different if produced in China?
It's more so the way that it's talked about in the book. Like I'm not an expert on China, and so I'm repeating things that are in the book. But the way that an alternative way that it is approached is as a social technology. And this goes, I mean, this kind of comes from this like history of specifically Chinese cybernetics through this engineer called Qian Xuesen, who has a very interesting history. But he was at he founded the Jet Propulsion Lab in California with like Jack Parsons and all of these like really important people for the beginning of artificial intelligence. Got put under house arrest because they suspected he might be a communist spy, because it was like the like Red Scare kind of era, and then basically got deported back to China just in time to develop their nuclear weapons program for the Second World War, which was kind of a big mistake from the US's point of view. So he kind of developed cybernetics in China, and because he had to play along with whatever the government wanted at the time, he developed it within this context of like social engineering. And so he had this kind of idea called the giant complex open system, where he thinks about an intelligence as an ecology of human workers, people who are doing like managerial jobs, factory infrastructure, raw materials. And he also, just to spice it up a bit, chucks in a little bit of like somatic science. So like qigong kind of energy, which is totally edited out of his history by state narratives of his kind of career. So he had this kind of like crazy idea of this like holistic cybernetic system, which was an intelligence. It's not an individual human, it's a social system. And there's like a kind of interesting current of like young, like leftist Chinese, kind of like unorthodox Chinese leftists who are like going like, what if we went back to this moment of like realized cybernetic theory, like this kind of post-Soviet cybernetics thing? Let's go back to like Chile, or like this thing that sort of was happening in the wake of left accelerationism a few years ago. This is happening in China too, and they're like, let's go back to Qian Xuesen's ideas and think about the alternative future that we could have had if we had this kind of artificial intelligence. So that's like one example of how it could be different.
We do have a last question online. It's quite a big question. We're running out of time. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it quickly. It's sparking some debate in the chat already, but it's about how can you circumnavigate AI, anticipating your own conception of self and building homogeny among people's ways of being. We talk about multitudes and singularities as having political potential, putting technologies to positive uses, but how is it possible to do so with a technology that's becoming ubiquitous, yet evanescent and invisible? So I don't know if you can speak to any of those points in a couple of minutes.
Quick answer is like Alex Keacher has this kind of thing where we have like two sides. When you're really in the girl, the complete girl, you've got two sides, and one is like, it recognizes that you're interpolated as an individual consumer subject. And that you can't just like totally resist that, because otherwise you'll give yourself away. But you also have this like understanding of yourself that is not nucleated on that autonomous individual subjecthood. And she talks about kind of like some of these like egregore phenomena that happen online. There's a whole list of them. I don't want to kind of go into weird internet wildlife here. But so she's like, the girl like blows a kiss to the subject level algorithms that are measuring its behavior and extracting value and trying to sell it things. But that's only to like keep it distracted while it goes about kind of melting away into these other ways of being. So this kind of like recognizing yourself as maybe like not actually being human from the beginning, or the definition of the human being put into question by what's happening. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's maybe one way of thinking about it, that, you know, you're not always one thing all the time. You can have subtle levels and different sides.
I think we are way over time at this point, but thank you so much, Amy, and thank you everyone.